Welcome to Reddit Quests. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. Reddit, have you ever benefited from someone else's misfortune? Number 1. I benefited from 2 misfortunes in one fell swoop. Back in 2010 or so, I decided if the housing market was going to be so terrible, I'd save up and buy a foreclosure. I saved every dollar I could and kept going to auction after auction. 9 times out of 10, the bank would hold on to the house, setting a reserve higher than anyone was willing to pay. Countless times I'd find a house I was interested in, do all of my homework, look forward and stress out about the auction for 2 or 3 days preceding, wondering if this would be the one that finally worked out. Take off work to attend the auction, they're usually around 10 a.m. to noon, and then be disappointed because I never had a shot due to the reserve. In 2012, there was another house I was interested in, like so many before it. I checked out the property, and it was nicer than many I'd been looking at. I knew it was out of my price range, and it was going to be another disappointment. I went through the motions anyway. I checked it over as best I could. I did all the research I could and decided how much I was willing to pay. The auction was on July 5th, so I'd have to cut my July 4th vacation a day short and likely waste my time yet again. I went anyway, and no one showed. The auctioneer came to the courthouse steps where I was waiting. She read through the legal ESE that she's required to do, audience or not. I waited for the moment. This property had 2 mortgages. The first mortgage was low, but typically in this situation the second mortgage holder will show up to the auction and buy the property, so they're not left without a means to collect. She read through her stuff, she announced the opening price. She said since no one else was there to bid against me, I could buy the house for $1 more than the first mortgage holder's reserve price, edited for clarity. It was roughly $60K less than I was prepared to pay that day. I bought my house for about 60% of what it's worth. I kept assuming someone would call me and say there was an error in the paperwork, and I'd have to give up my house. That never happened. I feel bad that someone lost their home, but that event took place without my interference. Whoever held the second mortgage on the house definitely screwed up by not showing up to the sale that day. Number 2, I was working at entry level for my company and been dying to get into sales and start making more than $12/HR as a coordinator. My senior manager liked me and gave me a lot of interviews for jobs I realistically had no chance of getting so that I could get experience. My senior manager liked me and gave me a lot of interviews for jobs I realistically had no chance of getting so that I could get experience. My senior manager liked me and gave me a lot of interviews for jobs I realistically had no chance of getting so that I could get experience. One day, after interviewing for a job that would land me $16/HR, life-changing money at the time, I go home to a 3-day weekend I set up for myself. Play a ton of Jak and Daxter collection on PlayStation 3, and get absolutely fucking drunk as fucking hell. Then my phone rings, and it's our general manager. He says verbatim, "Hey, the guy I hired for the sales job failed his drug test and I have no choice. The job is yours. I don't think you're ready, but I don't have any other moves. Don't let me down, you're at $16.67. Hangs up. I didn't even care, I cried. Number 3. When I was 6, I legit found a $100 bill on the ground of a black Endecker store. That was pretty rad, especially because having $100 as a 6-year-old basically made me feel like a millionaire. Number 4. A girl in my circle of friends, who lives a few hours away in my hometown, cheated on her boyfriend who happened to live where I do currently, so he broke up with her. Another friend asked me if I would take some stuff of his to him on her behalf, since I drive back and forth all the time. I obliged, not because I particularly liked that girl, but because it wasn't inconvenient and at the time, I didn't really know the situation. I meet this guy for the first time and he's obviously heartbroken, but he's super sweet and thanks me for bringing me his stuff and offers money for gas. We end up talking for like 4 hours just out of nowhere. It's like we perfectly synced up. He's not even flirting with me or anything, just chatting and talking about life and love and heartbreak and everything in between. I decline the offer for gas and counter with no, but you can buy me dinner instead if you want. I'm not a particularly forward girl, but I say to myself, fuck it, you'll probably never see him again. And I can't very well let this guy get away, who I just talked to for an entire afternoon without so much as a bathroom break. Needless to say, he's my boyfriend now. I'd hate that girl if she wasn't instrumental in putting us together. Number 5, my best friend and I worked for the same company but at different locations. A new location opened, and we both applied for the management position there. She ended up getting it, but I was offered her old position, which was a cushy job. The position she got ended up being a shitstorm. She actually lost weight and started having panic attacks. I was so mad when she got the job over me, but I really dodged a bullet. Number 6, a family friend fell ill with Parkinson's, and he didn't want to keep his Corvette being how he really couldn't drive it anymore, so he let me buy it for mega cheap, $3,500. Number 7. While picking up trash for the city, I found $20,000 in hundreds in a false drawer in a heavy oak dresser. Apparently the old man that owned the house passed away and the family dropped everything on the curb. They must have sold the house very quick because when I went back later that week it was a new homeowner that bought it from a middle-aged couple. Either that or the new homeowner dumped everything they didn't want. Either way, me and the pickup crew split it 5 ways and I was $4K richer. Number 8. Some guy died and all of his art supplies were donated to my high school. My art teacher liked me, knew I worked 2 part-time jobs, and that I didn't get along with my family so that I avoided asking them for things and didn't bother inviting them to my award ceremonies. They'd find some way to make me the bad guy on the way to the ceremony if they even decided to bring me since I was such a terrible burden. So, he just gave me all that guy's supplies. It's been 9-ish years and I'm still using most of them. Thanks, dead guy and high school art teacher. Number 9. My ex-GF totaled her car and was injured. Minor, mild neck injury and a broken arm, treated in the ER and released. I went to see her and they kept mentioning her passenger and how we were doing fine and blah blah blah. Well, she hadn't mentioned anyone being with her, so I was a little confused but didn't think a ton of it, BC. I assumed it was her little brother. Well, when we got home her brother was there and fine, so I started asking questions and she got shady. Turned out she had been cheating on me for months and it was her new guy in the car. His injuries were minor as well, but I was able to get the fuck out. My benefit? A girl she had introduced me to about a week prior is now my wife. Number 10. I applied for a job, went through a few interviews, but I was not their top contender. Well, the top person had a criminal record, so she ended up losing the job offer, which went straight to me. One of the best jobs I have had, because of the people, not the place. Number 11. On New Year's Eve 2011, someone passed away, and I received their liver in a life-saving transplant. I was 20 years old. On December 22, 2015, another person passed away, and I received their liver in another life-saving transplant. I was able to live to turn 25 in March and return to college in August because of both of these people whose identities I will never know. Number 12. My wife had gone wedding shopping at one of the chain bridal stores and found a dress she loved for $2,000. Coincidentally, a co-worker of hers had bought the dress unbeknownst to my wife and abruptly called off her own wedding with no explanation. My wife got her dream dress in her size for $475, but it definitely sucked for the guy who had his engagement called off with no explanation. Number 13. In 1984, my family, who had previously been struggling farmers living in a decrepit old farmhouse that only had electricity in one room, sold the farm and bought an enormous house in the redwood forest near San Francisco from a gay couple. I was 4 at the time, so I don't know the exact amount we paid for it, but it was probably about 10% what it was worth, maybe less. It was the height of the HIV panic in America. There was a lot of misinformation about how the disease was transmitted. People were genuinely worried about catching it from sitting on public toilet seats or swimming in the ocean. So nobody wanted to buy a house gay people had been living in because they were afraid they would get HIV from the house somehow. My parents had a practical farming sort of mentality and were not worried about getting HIV from a house. They just left the kids with grandma for a week while they painted over the explicit murals. We only lived in that house a year or two when my parents sold it for an enormous profit, which they used to buy a normal-sized house in a wealthy suburb with good schools. The rest of the money, and there was a lot left, they invested. That money paid for mine and my siblings' extensive education, for family vacations every summer, shoes that didn't have holes in them, for every sort of upper-middle-class luxury. I sometimes wonder what happened to the previous owners of the house. We never had any contact with them. Were they sick? Dead? Did it ruin them financially to sell this amazing home for 1/10 its price to a random white trash family? I hope things were okay for them, but it's hard to imagine they were. You don't practically give away your beautiful mansion in the redwood forests if your life is going well. Quite literally, my family profited from bigotry and homophobia. That's kind of uncomfortable. I don't think my parents were bad people for buying the house, but it's a weird feeling to know that my comfortable and happy childhood was built on the ruination of other people's lives, and to not even know anything about them. Number 14, I got hired at a company to do a job I wasn't thrilled about. I really needed out of my other job. The week before I started, a guy in the department had a severe stroke. My first day I was moved over to take over what he was doing, much more suited to my skills, and then have risen up through the company ranks pretty quickly. Number 15, close family friend found out that her husband of many years was cheating on her with the nurse she hired to watch over her mother, who has severe dementia. When she confronted him, he moved out to be with aforementioned nurse. So, family friend does what any spurned woman would do. She separated their assets by selling me his very new Jeep for a fraction of its blue book value and sold off various other of his items to my parents and other friends. Number 16, I was walking through a casino in Vegas, went to play a machine, realized someone had left about $70 in it. I pressed spin and won over $200 on the first go. I cashed out and ran to my room. We had a posh brunch with champagne the following day. Number 17. A teacher got sick mid-year. I stepped in as an interim and finished it out. She had one more year left for regular retirement, so it was possible she would try to just get through the following school year for full benefits. The school is a good one. She opted to retire early after all. I was hired as a contract teacher and able to support my daughter and have health insurance. I also really like teaching here. Number 18. Girlfriend and I were looking forward to a nice night at home. We had bought a bunch of stuff from the store to cook, and I was looking forward to enjoying Monday Night Raw. We get to my apartment and my roommate and his girlfriend are watching football and taking up all the space in the kitchen. Now I am a Ravens fan, and he was a Steelers fan, so not only was I not going to be able to watch wrestling, but I would have to watch a football team I despise, and on top of that, we would have to wait for them to finish cooking, eating, and cleaning before we could use the kitchen. I was bummed and things were looking down until I heard my roommate's girlfriend scream in pain. She had sliced herself by accident chopping something for their dinner and had a pretty bad cut on her hand. They tried to bandage it, but it just kept bleeding, so he eventually drove her to the hospital, leaving me and my girlfriend with an empty kitchen and TV for use at our leisure. Ended up being a pretty good Monday. Number 19. Thank you, stranger, for taking out a 15-year mortgage, making 8 years worth of payments, then losing your job during the recession so that I could take out a 30-year mortgage to afford living in and moving my family to a good neighborhood and a great school district. Literally went from living in the ghetto in 1,000 square feet apartments that we couldn't afford to the suburbs in a 4,300 square feet house without sweating how to pay for it. Where most of my neighbors are still underwater, we're so above water we should make an easy 75 to 100% ROI when we decide to sell. It has had the greatest positive impact in my life, on my health and sanity, and to my family's financial well-being, not to mention social standing. Number 20. I got a job because the person who had it prior to me died of lung cancer. I didn't find out until much later when I also learned that one of my coworkers had been good friends with this person. The company kept my application and resume in time for nearly a year while this person was terminal. They had me already selected to take her place as soon as her seat was vacant. Little creepy, yeah. Number 21. I actually benefited from my own misfortune. In 2007 I wrecked my car. I had to pay for a 3-week rental and thus couldn't afford the big Vegas trip my roommates and all our friends were going on. I thought I was missing out, but I didn't. It turns out that our friend Paul acted like a spoiled drunken dick all weekend and ruined the trip. He pissed everyone off so bad that was all they could talk about, and no one talked to him for a couple months after. As for me, I had a quiet, drama-free weekend drinking beer and playing GTA. Number 22, kind of depressing, but when I was around 8 years old, I had a bully. An awful bully. I dreaded going to school and I went home with fresh bruises almost every day. I tried getting help from teachers, but no luck. This was before the anti-bully initiative started up, so it was never really taken all that seriously. One day my bully didn't show up to school. Turns out that bully had driven a go-kart into one of the lakes in town and the belt got stuck, so they drowned. Everyone around me saw it as a horrible tragedy, but for me it was just pure relief. Looking back on it now, 20 years later, I feel like a monster for how I reacted. Number 23, I was working for a startup many years ago and there was a team at the company that I wanted to join. They did a lot of fun projects, but everyone there never left, so it was hard to get on the team. Over Christmas on year 1 of the team members died. Wife was charged with murder because she poisoned him for cheating on her, and I got his old position. I'm still at the company some 19 years later. Number 24. When I was 17 and working at a movie theater, I was sweeping under seats and looked down in my dustpan and saw a dollar bill. I only saw one and just picked it up and stuffed it in my coat pocket with the loose change I always find. I did laundry on my uniform that week and noticed it was actually a $100 bill. Being a few days later, it would have been suspicious to turn it back in, so I kept it. Number 25. I met my boss in jail in Australia. I won't say what he was in for, but I was in for GBH, grievous bodily harm. Got into a fight while clubbing one night and the guy got hurt. I met this Lebanese guy in there and just thought he was funny and pretty cool to hang out with, but after we both got out, which was around the same time he offered me a job. I'm now a construction supervisor with 2 kids, a wife, and a mortgage, and I owe it all to that experience and opportunities given. Number 26, define misfortune. The guy who was best man at our wedding committed suicide last year. He was a great guy and was due to be godfather to my youngest daughter, but he'd always struggled with depression. Just found out he left me enough in his will to pay off 80% of my remaining mortgage. Number 27. My neighbors growing up were dentists who owned 2 practices. In the nasty affair and following divorce, my family not only got a 70 inches TV, but a treadmill, exercise bike, nice gas fireplace, etc. Number 28. I left my job at an MSP. The people left could not effectively handle my job. Initially, I got a $15K a year contract from one of their customers to continue providing Tier 2 support for them. A few months later, I was poached from the job I went to by another customer for a huge increase in income. End result, I have a really good job, make great money, have an excellent contract position on the side, and still do 1 to 2K a month inside work for the company I originally left my MSP job for. Number 29. My grandma passed away, and since my father had also since passed, the portion of the estate that was supposed to go to my dad was split between my half-brother and me. Was able to go to school with no worry about the cost, and I still have a big portion being released to me when I'm 21 in a few months. Number 30. I had just gotten married and had a new job lined up right when I got back from my honeymoon. Got a call during our honeymoon that there was a hiring freeze. The job I was supposed to start in 10 days didn't exist anymore, but if I wanted to, I could apply along with hundreds of others for some possible positions months down the line if when the freeze was lifted. This was especially bad because the night after our wedding, so about a week earlier, my wife ended up going into the hospital for an emergency appendectomy, so I was staring at thousands in medical bills and now no job. Turns out my former boss at my old job had a stroke. He was the only person at the place who knew how to do any of his work, except for myself. I got a desperate call from my former employer within 24 hours of finding out I had no job, waiting to ask if there were any way I could come back and fill in for my boss while he tried to recover from his stroke. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. My former boss, who was a great guy, made a full recovery, and it gave me enough time to look for a good job instead of the first thing to help pay the bills. Story 31. Once when I was 12, my dad took me to a police auction. They were selling all kinds of random junk. I remember I bought 2 ugly small paintings of sheep, but I thought they were cute at the time. Anyway, I'm the only young person there. The next item for bid is a hair barrette. Like a plain blue barrette. He points at me and says, "I know this girl over here wants it," and kept pushing it. I'm thinking, fuck no, I don't want that ugly barrette to leave me alone. Finally, my dad just hands me $1 and tells me to bid on it, so I did. He hands me the barrette and says, "And with the barrette comes this brown paper bag it was attached to, that has $50 in it." So some person had $50 in a brown paper bag and clipped it close with a barrette, and I won it all at a police auction for $1. Number 32, 2008 recession baby. Had a line of credit and just sold a business, so I was stacked with capital. Then the recession hit, and I bought some cheap-ass real estate that's worth millions now. Number 33, I'll start by saying I'm in the Canadian Navy. A few years back, 3 or 4 ships all pulled into the same port. The ship I was on happened to be the party ship, so a bunch of sailors from other ships came over to mine for a few hours of drinks and debauchery. Good times were had by most. Well, one half-wit decided he'd try to pick a fight with me. I ignored him, but for a solid hour this a-hole was doing anything he could to pick a fight with me. I had never seen this guy before and still have no idea what his issue was. Eventually, this got the beloved jerk wad kicked out. The problem for him is that he left his jacket behind. In his jacket was his wallet, and in his wallet was $200. He got the wallet and jacket back, but I felt that $200 was appropriate payment for him being such an epic spunk monkey. Number 34. My workplace was slowly transitioning into 24 inches monitors for everyone. I only had one 24 inches monitor and one 19 inches monitor. Working in various data analysis software programs all day, the 24 inches monitor is godsend. Well, a big layoff happened and many 24 inches monitors became available. I now have 2 24 inches monitors and it makes my job immensely easier. Number 35. Someone dropped $600 in large bills in the casino parking lot. I'm pretty sure I should have turned it in, but I asked around later and no one had called for it. Number 36. I was hired as an assistant manager at a struggling bank branch. My manager, who had an existing chronic health condition, was new to that location too. 6 months in, her health took a turn for the worse. While she was out on medical leave, business picked up tremendously. She'd call from time to check in, and I'd deliver better and better results. She seemed annoyed at our success without her, and began calling less often. She was physically unable to return to work, and her job fell into my lap. From the time she went out on leave until the time I was promoted, we basically went from worst to first. I ended up winning my company's top award that year, and truly did nothing to earn it aside from just having a more positive attitude and being in the right place at the right time. Number 37. This was back when I lived in Brooklyn. The neighborhood was a mix of Puerto Rican and hipster at the time. I was headed to the subway, and in front of this Dwayne Reed, apparently some dude had tied up his pit bull right outside of the store and ran in to get something. The dog was very mean, snarling and growling at passerbys. Ahead of me was this hipster, and she was walking a little terrier, and she was on her phone not really paying attention. The terrier got too close to the pit bull, and it was a bloodbath in a matter of seconds. I ran over there, and the girl is absolutely hysterical. I pulled her away from it and shielded her from the gruesome sight. Once she was away from it, I ran into the Dwayne Reed screaming, "Whose fucking dog is that outside?" Nobody stepped forward. I'm guessing whoever owned it just dipped out to avoid any trouble. I go back outside, and I'm with the girl and the cops, and she's just a total wreck. I gave all the details I could to the cops, and they said they'd follow up with her what they could. Unfortunately, there were no cameras on the outside, and nothing ever came of it. I walked her home, consoling her. Followed up with her a few days later to see how she was doing, and she profusely thanked me and offered to take me to dinner for being so helpful. We go to dinner, and I get her laughing, and we have a few drinks, and it's the first time she's had a good time since the horrible thing that happened to the dog. We go back to her place and hook up. We ended up going out 3 times. However, both of us knew it wasn't really going to anywhere because every time she saw me, she would be reminded of her poor dog. Number 38. When my mom passed away, my sister and I got a significant inheritance. It's allowed my sister to buy her first home, and I started a college fund for my son. I'd trade it in a second for the chance to give mom one more hug. Number 39. A few years ago, myself and a few coworkers were trying to leave because the hours in management were terrible. Coworker V interviewed somewhere but got a better job at another place and referenced me to the place he turned down. I mentioned to coworker A, we carpooled 2 days a week, that I had an interview and very naively answered when she asked where. I do not like lying, and it is not something that ever even occurs to me to do. I thought she was asking because she was curious/happy for me. Turns out A decides to also apply for the job, and she gets it. I refuse to speak to her ever again. Then it turns out my mother gets a job there a few months later. She tells me A doesn't have enough full-time work for original position, so she's running mail errands, doing other grunt work, etc. And she has to work with my mother. She essentially cheated on my father and abandoned me and my 4 siblings for a married man. I would never want to work with her. Had I gotten that job, I would never have met my awesome boyfriend of 20 months either. That job was absolute terror, but we both say it was worth it to have met each other. TLDR. Coworker betrays me by applying for job I was recommended to, gets it, and it's nothing like what we were told. And she is stuck working with my annoying mother. I meet BF at the job I tried to leave. 2 times fate intervened on my behalf. In college, I was failing a critical class. The professor died on the way to class mid-semester, and we all received automatic passes. Another time I was going to court against a guy over some money and was really dreading it. I knew that despite being in the right, he was going to make my life miserable and had a good chance of winning due to his own ability to influence people and spin things his way. He killed himself before trial, so I won. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos.